Welcome everybody. These are some verb basics. First of all, let's talk about infinitives. ¿Qué quiere decir en inglés? Descansar. You probably know that means to rest. Nadar, to swim, and so on and so forth. But what we really want to know is, what do these verbs have in common? What do they have in common? And if you're looking at it, you're going to say, well, they all have to in them. Estudiar means to study. Escuchar, to listen. And we really need to know that they are infinitives. And all verbs in Spanish end in AR, ER, or IR. And all those verbs are verbs that are infinitive because they are in their AR, ER, or IR form. So a verb that ends in the AR, ER, or IR form is said to be in the infinitive form. So what is the infinitive form of the verb, you may ask? Well, it's the form of the verb that is unmarked for a specific time and person. And it means to plus the meaning of the verb. Because if I say to rest and I ask who's resting, you can't answer the question because we don't know. We don't know when they rest. Are they resting? Did they rest? Have they just rested? We don't know when it's happening or who is doing it. Because to rest, you're just talking about the activity. So then if we want to do something with our AR verbs, that's what we do. So what happens when we want to specify who is doing the activity? If we wanted to take to watch and figure out who's watching, we have to conjugate. And conjugating is when we mark a verb for a specific person at a specific time. So we don't want to say to watch, we want to say I watch or she watches. So we need to conjugate. And in order to conjugate a verb in the present tense, there are 4 steps. First of all, you obviously have to start with a verb, and it needs to be in the infinitive form. Then we're going to drop its 2-letter ending to find the stem of the verb. So practicar, to practice, the stem is practic. Cocinar, cocine. Estudiar, estudi. Alquilar, alquil. So that's the stem of the verb. Once you've taken off that AR, what you have left is the stem. Then you obviously have to know who the person is that's doing the activity in order to specify who is doing the activity. And we're going to add the appropriate AR present tense verb to the ending of the end of the verb because that's where endings go. They go to the end. Does that make sense? Oh, yeah. So here are the endings that go at the end of the stem of the AR verbs. And they are o, as, a, amos, an, and ice. So these ones are when you're talking about yourself. You've got singular if you're just talking about yourself, I. And then if you are plural, like me and my sister, is my sister and I, 2 people when you're talking about yourself, amos. Talking to someone, to, talking about someone. And you all know that to means you when you're talking to friends, and usted means you when you're talking to someone that you need to be respectful of. So then if we wanted to take comprar and conjugate it, so if I wanted to know how to say I buy, you buy, she or he buys, we buy, and they buy, we're going to have to conjugate that verb. So first you take the verb, then you must attach the end, then you're left with just your stem, then you add your endings on to conjugate that verb. O, as, a, amos, and an. So that if you want to say I buy, compro, you buy, compras, he, she buys, compra, we buy, compramos, they buy, compran. Are we getting it? I hope so. What about andar? Well, first we must attach the end, then we're left with just a stem, then we add our endings on to conjugate that verb. Ando, andas, anda, andamos, and andan. So that's easy enough, but what about ER and IR verbs? Well, it's very similar. ER verbs have 1 set of endings, o, es, e, hemos, and en. And IR verbs have another set, o, es, e, hemos, and en. So the difference between the ER and IRs is just right here. The ERs are hemos, the IRs are hemos. So let's see how that looks. How about compartir? First we must attach the end, then we're left with just a stem. Then we add our endings on to conjugate that verb. Comparto, compartes, comparte, compartimos, comparten. I share, you share, he shares, she shares, we share, they share. Or comprender, to understand. I understand, comprendo. You understand, comprendes. Comprende, comprendemos, and comprenden. Yay! However, what if we want to use some fancier verbs? We can do fancier verbs, no problemo. It's very simple. Let's talk about some stem-changing verbs, and you may know these. You may be very familiar with these few that we're going to start off with. Stem-changing verbs are verbs that have a different stem for conjugation. Sounds weird, but I'm sure you're very familiar with jugar, to play. And what's the stem of jugar? Well, we take the AR off, and that's the stem, jug, and we're going to get into that. Dormir, to sleep. Querer, to want. And poder, to can or be able to, like, can I go to the bathroom? So stem-changing verbs are called stem-changing verbs because they're going to change in the stem. They have a vowel change, a spelling change. So what's the stem? We remember it's the part of the verb left after you take the infinitive off. Like jugar, the stem is jug. Dormir, it's dorm. Querer, it's care. And poder, it's pod. So stem-changing verbs, unlike regular verbs, don't just use the stem and then the ending. Like I said, they have a spelling change. Jugar has a spelling change with the U, and it goes juego, juegas, juega, jugamos, and juegan. Note that it doesn't change up in the nosotros. It only changes in these. And if we draw a box around them, they kind of look like a boot. A very weird-looking shoe or boot. Hey, there's a sneaker! And that's why sometimes we call these boot or shoe verbs. See the boot? Because they change in the boot. It doesn't spell change outside of the boot. So let's take a look at dormir. Duermo, duermes, duerme, dormimos, and duermen. And again, there is our boot. And this should probably be very familiar to you. Poder, puedo, puedes, puede, podemos, and pueden. And again, there is our shoe or our boot. And querer, stem changes and it goes quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, and quieren. And again, there is our boot. So it's super fascinating, and I hope you got it.